Well met, travelers. I am Bob of the Old Ways. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, please be sure to like, subscribe, and you know the drill. I'll repeat it at the end of the video. If you're not new here, stay tuned because I think you might suspect what I'm doing here, but time will tell. Anyway, as you can tell from the title card, we're going to be talking about Hollywood forcing diversity into the works of J.r.r. Tolkien. This is a conversation that's been on the minds of a lot of people lately, especially a lot of Tolkien fans, thanks to the new Amazon TV show, The Rings of Power. You'll find people all over Twitter and all over the comment sections of YouTube videos and among content creators talking about this very real and very big problem. It breaks immersion for a lot of fans. It's not that they're racist necessarily. It's just that they want a production of Tolkien's work or an adaptation of Tolkien's work that respects Tolkien's lore. So I thought we would talk about that for a little bit. And I think one of the best ways to start would be with kind of a little Middle-earth history lesson. Now, one aspect of Tolkien's lore that isn't really talked about a whole lot outside of really deep-cut Tolkien fandom is the fact that Tolkien held that his stories of Middle-earth and its wider world, which he called Arda — Arda was the name of the world in which Middle-earth was placed — Tolkien held that all of these tales took place on our real Earth, except in much, much earlier ages of the world. Famously, the long arc of the story of Middle-earth takes place in 3 ages, each of which was a very long time. The first age was tens of thousands of years, for instance, and at the end of each age, the Earth went through great, some would say, cataclysmic changes. The stories with which we are most familiar, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, took place at the end of the Third Age, which was marked by the end of the War of the Ring, the destruction of the One Ring, and the ascension of Aragorn to the title of King Elisar of the Reunited Kingdoms. All of that was the end of the Third Age. And ever since it became known to Tolkien fans that Tolkien held his stories to have taken place in the real world, just deeper back in history than anyone remembers, the question has been asked, when exactly did all of this happen relative to our way of tracking time? Tolkien himself answered this question twice that we know of publicly, and gave somewhat contradictory answers. In his first one, a letter that he wrote in 1958 in response to a fan, partially in response to a fan asking him this question, he responded that he felt the end of The Lord of the Rings had happened roughly 6,000 years ago, or 6,000 years ago relative to 1958 when he wrote that letter. But 2 years later, he told... So in that first answer, he said we were now in the 4th age of the world. But 2 years later, he answered another letter in which he said that we, in the modern day, are currently in the 7th age of the world. At that time, it was 1960. So whatever the calendar year is currently, that is the year of the 7th age in which we are living. And the fact that he felt we were in the 7th age of the world, which he held to have begun with the birth of Christ, implies that there were 3 other ages between the end of the 3rd age and the beginning of the 7th. And he never really spelled that out very clearly. And after his death, when his notes were gone over by his son Christopher and various Tolkien scholars, it became evident that Tolkien's intent was to integrate the broad, sweeping, grand history of Arda into the real prehistory of the real Earth as much as was possible. And he had made a bunch of different notes that just confused the issue quite a lot. So recently, the most recent chronology put together by Carl Hochstetter in his book, The Nature of Middle-earth, working with Tolkien's direct notes, has concluded that the end of the Third Age was 9,600 years ago. I want you to remember that number, because that's important in just a moment. That number, 9,600 years ago, means that all of the stories we've read about Aragorn, about the hobbits, about this, the fall of Numenor, all of that happened prior to 9,600 years ago. Now, how does this tie into the question of forced diversity? Well, I would say it ties in this way. To make an adaptation of Tolkien's work that is loyal to his vision and to his authorial intent, which was to integrate the history of Arda with the real prehistory of the real Earth, then we're going to have to make some difficult choices about casting the characters, because we're confronted with a very inconvenient fact about ethnicity. And I know that this is an uncomfortable subject for some people, but again, my motivation here is fidelity to Tolkien's intent, not any kind of malice towards any group of people, whatever race they may be. But the truth is the truth, the facts are the facts, and we have to take them as they are. And the simple fact is that according to the most recent and most accurate understanding we have of human evolution, white skin like this did not exist before 8,000 years ago. Now I want you to keep those two numbers in mind, and let's try to synchronize Tolkien's intent with real history here. We know from Tolkien's notes that his intent was to integrate the history of Arda, Numenor, Middle-earth, all of that, with the real history, or the real prehistory, of the real Earth. The third age of the world, at the end of the War of the Ring and the ascension of Aragorn to his kingship, happened 9,600 years ago. White people did not exist until 8,000 years ago, which is 1,600 years after the end of the Third Age. So the uncomfortable reality here is, I'm sorry if this offends anyone, but if we want to remain true to the lore, and we want to remain true to Tolkien's authorial intent, we just have to accept the fact that there were no white people in any of Tolkien's stories. And that means that this is the forced diversity we need to talk about. Now, we all know why forced diversity is a problem, right? It's disrespectful to the original author's intent, to the author's lore. It's not that we have a bigoted preference for one race over another. We just want fidelity to the author's vision. So it begs the question, if Tolkien set all of his stories at an ancient time of the Earth's history before the existence of white people, what is it with Hollywood forcing its white identity politics into Tolkien's lore? I mean, I'm happy to see the Rings of Power taking some small steps towards rectifying this problem by giving us a more ethnically diverse depiction of the Second Age, but there are still a lot of white faces running around, and they shouldn't be there. Nothing against white people in general. I am a white person after all, but it just feels out of place. So what can we do about this? Well, as fans, our power is somewhat limited, but I think a fun project would be to recast the original Peter Jackson film trilogy with actors who are more ethnically and historically and lore accurate to Tolkien's intent of integrating the history of Arda with the prehistory of the real Earth. Now, this is not to throw shade on the performances of any of the actors in those films. I love those films. I think they were iconic. Those portrayals of those characters by those actors defined the public imagination about those characters for probably generations to come. But one day there's going to have to be a reckoning between the lore and the author's intent and the vision of the filmmakers. So, I've taken on a little fan project here, and maybe you can help me down in the comments. I've gone through and done some fan recasting of the Fellowship. Not the entire cast of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, just the core 9 characters of the original Fellowship of the Ring, plus 2 additional characters, so we can have some lady faces in there as well. So come along with me as we take a look at my fan recasting of the Lord of the Rings film trilogy using ethnically and historically and lore accurate casting. Now, like I said, we don't have to change everything. We can keep most things the same. In fact, we could do a shot-for-shot remake of the entire trilogy, change nothing except the actors on the screen. And we need to start with Frodo Baggins because he is the most important character in the story. He is the one on whom the entire story depends. And Elijah Wood gave an iconic performance, a brilliant performance. I loved what he did with the character. He's got such expressive eyes, such an expressive face. The subtlety of his performance was truly a masterclass, and it would be difficult to top it. But it doesn't have to be topped, it just has to be equaled. And I think the 2 actors I picked in this remake, this lore accurate, this author's intent accurate remake of the original film trilogy, could do just as good a job as Elijah Wood did, especially with those expressive eyes of his. So, my first choice to play Frodo Baggins is Daniel Kaluuya. Now, if you've seen Daniel in anything, you know he's wonderful. I first saw him in Get Out, where his face acting sold the entire film for me. We also know him from Black Panther, where he was great. And he's been terrific in absolutely everything I've seen him in. Again, he's got those beautiful, expressive eyes and the very subtle face acting. I think he can do wonderful things with his voice. So I think he could sell the role of Frodo really, really well. And if we can't get Daniel Kaluuya, I won't even say that. I won't say if we can't get him, because my other choice to play Frodo is equally great, although I'm less familiar with his full body of work. So I would pick Daniel just because I know more of his stuff. But a good alternate choice, in my opinion, is Dev Patel. Now, Dev, from what I've seen, is terrific. He's got all the same things going for him that Elijah Wood and Daniel Kaluuya have. Those expressive eyes, the subtle face acting, the charisma he can exude on screen. It's riveting. So, another benefit here of casting Dev is the fact that he's got slightly lighter skin than Daniel does, and that can be helpful because when it comes to casting Samwise Gamgee, we could, if we wanted to, take into account the fact that Tolkien described Sam as having brown hands, which implies that he was of Harfoot descent because the Harfoots were browner than the rest of the hobbits. So if we want to go with the interpretation that Sam has darker skin than Frodo and the other hobbits, Dev would be a good choice because the actors I chose to play Sam are much darker complected than he is. And I did pick 2 actors for each role. It was hard sometimes because in some of the roles there was only one I really wanted to play, but I felt it was only fair to pick 2. So having said that, let's move on to Frodo's loyal companion, Samwise Gamgee, portrayed in the original films, again, masterfully, by Sean Astin. I don't want anyone watching this video to think that I'm throwing shade at any of the performers in these films. They all did wonderful jobs. This is not about how talented they are. It's just about maintaining fidelity to Tolkien's authorial intent. So anyway, Samwise Gamgee is a role that requires a lot of gravitas and a lot of naivete. He naively trusts Frodo, but he feels responsible for Frodo as well. So he sort of has to be the father figure sometimes. Others he has to be the loyal servant. Others he has to be the champion, etc. He has to wear a lot of hats. And Sean Astin did a great job with this. So the actors I chose to fill Sean Astin's shoes are equally talented. My first choice is John Boyega, who brings some action acting chops to the role as well, because Sam does have a couple of action scenes. But the main thing here is that Boyega is really good, not just at the emotions I mentioned for Sean's performance, but he's also got great comedic timing. So when he's doing scenes with like Gollum, for instance, that is going to be really important. And we know from his performance in the Star Wars sequel trilogy that he's really good in these kinds of roles. If you saw him in Attack the Block, which is where I first saw him, you know he could carry a movie by himself. So he's essentially a co-lead character next to Frodo. So John Boyega, great choice. If we can't get John Boyega, we should go with Winston Duke. Now, this one was a hard choice for me because Winston, I think, gives off big dwarf energy. And I almost picked him to play Gimli. But I settled on him playing Sam because he's got kind of the physical appearance of Sean Astin, like kind of the same build. So he would bring a lot of the same physicality to the role. And like Sean Astin and like John Boyega, he's a very versatile actor and he can cover the full range of emotions needed to carry the role of Samwise Gamgee. So that covers the two most important hobbits in the story. That leaves us with Merry and Pippin. And these two have to be cast together. We have to cast actors who are good at comedy and at drama, because they're mostly comic characters, but they've got some really serious moments to handle too. So let's take a look at my choices for Merry and Pippin. First off, we've got Merry. Of the two comic relief hobbits, he is the least comic. He does have some, some funny moments, but overall, in terms of his screen time, he's given slightly more dramatic work to do. So the actor who plays him is going to have to be able to wear both of those hats really well. And this one I had to think about a lot because there's a lot of actors to choose from. But the one I settled on as my first choice, I think, would nail it. And that is Aldous Hodge, who I am most familiar with from the TV show Leverage, where he was great. Age of the Geek, baby. He handled comedy and drama in that show very well, and did some good action work from time to time. He's also going to be playing Hawkman in the Black Adam movie, and he got a lot more yoked to play that role, so he might not be a good fit for Merry anymore, but hobbits wear a lot of baggy clothes, so we could cover up those muscles if we need to. But he would be my first choice to play. My second choice to play Merry is William J. Harper, who I'm put in second place just because I'm less familiar with his work than I am with Aldous Hodge's work. Everything I've seen by him is great, but I have not watched like the entire run of The Good Place, just a couple of episodes, and I really like the energy he brings. So I think he could be serious when he needed to be. He could be very funny when he needs to be. He's got a very versatile face and a really warm, loving, open personality, which makes him perfect for Merry. And that brings us to Peregrine Took, Pippin. This role needs to be played by a somewhat funnier actor than Merry does, an actor with deeper comedy roots. So I went with two well-known comic actors here. The first one is Kumail Nanjiani, who also has gotten really yoked lately, but again, we can put him under some baggy Hobbit clothes, and that would be fine. But Kumail has got really good comic timing. So that's the most important thing for playing Peregrine Took. And Kumail has also shown some hints of being really good at drama as well. So in the few bits of Pippin's arc where he needs to be serious, we've got that in Kumail. If we can't get Kumail Nanjiani, the other actor I picked is equally talented, equally brilliant, and that actor is Donald Glover. I really don't think I need to say anything more about this choice. If you've seen anything by Donald Glover, he's a real Renaissance man. He can sing, he can dance, he can write music, he can act in comedy and in drama, probably in horror too, although I haven't really seen him do that. I've heard he's difficult to work with, but it wouldn't be the first time an actor with that reputation brought the right energy to a film anyway. So that's why he's my second choice, because of his reputation as being somewhat difficult. But I think he would do, in terms of the craft, he would do just as well as Kumail Nanjiani. So I'd be happy with either choice from a creative perspective. Now that we're done with the hobbits in the Fellowship, we have to talk about Aragorn, my original man crush. Now, I'm totally straight, but, you know, every straight man has had a man crush. Mine was on a fictional character, and although he's no longer my favorite character in the Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King, he was my original favorite. I can honestly say Aragorn, my desire to be like Aragorn in the movies, is the reason I got into things like sword fighting and martial arts and all of that stuff, because I wanted to be Aragorn. So this one's near and dear to my heart. I needed to pick somebody that I think would be universally loved, universally praised, and whose choice, or whose selection would really require no explanation. So I'm betting you've already guessed who I picked, because the choice is obvious. But in case it's not obvious, here's my choice. Of course, it had to be Idris Elba. Who else would it be? Who else? The internet has been in love with Idris Elba for years now, and we've all wanted him to carry a tentpole, fantasy genre blockbuster movie for years. He's wanted it himself. He deserves it. And this kind of a project, remaking the Lord of the Rings movies in a way that is fidelitous, is that a word? In a way that is that honors Tolkien's intent to synchronize and integrate the history of Arda with the real prehistory of the Earth. Idris Elba is the perfect choice. He brings that brooding warrior poet energy to almost every role he plays. He's a great physical actor, really great dramatic actor, and frankly, he's handsome as hell. So, do we really need another choice? I don't think we do, but I made one anyway, just to be fair, because I had to pick two. I gave myself the rule of picking two actors for every role. So let's see who our backup Aragorn is. Chiwetel Ejiofor, an equally talented actor, the equal of Idris Elba in every way, in my opinion, but probably not as universally loved as Idris Elba. If you've seen Chiwetel Ejiofor in anything, it's probably Serenity or the Doctor Strange movies, and you know from that he's got the physical chops and the gravitas to carry the role. He's also got that very expressive set of eyes and that smooth voice that he can do a lot of really great work with. So if you want somebody to sing, somebody to deliver poetry, we know Chiwetel Ejiofor can do that just as well as Idris Elba can. I rest my case. The more tragic warrior poet of our tale, Boromir. Now this is the role that I think established Sean Bean's reputation for being killed in everything. This and Game of Thrones. It's not true. He isn't really killed in everything. But I think his portrayal of Boromir was great. And somebody who's going to fill his shoes would need to bring roughly the same energy, the same warrior poet energy as the actor who plays Aragorn, but with a little bit of darkness in him. Not enough darkness to be truly corrupted by the One Ring, but enough to be really powerfully tempted. And that sliver of darkness in his heart needs to be telegraphed by the performance the way that Sean Bean telegraphed it. So my first choice to play Boromir, for that reason, is Michael B. Jordan, who you might know from the Creed movies, or as the villain Killmonger in Marvel's Black Panther, which is the reason I picked him, because he's demonstrated in Black Panther that he can be evil. And he demonstrated in the Creed movies that he can be equally dynamic and equally warrior-like, but still being tender-hearted and being a good person. And some combination, a synthesis of those two archetypes is what you need to play Boromir. So that's why I picked Michael B. Jordan as my first choice for a historically and author intent accurate remake of the Lord of the Rings movies. But if we can't get Michael B. Jordan, my second choice is almost as perfect for this role. No Tears for Your Father. That's right, the one and only Sterling K. Brown. Now, I'm not as familiar with Sterling K. Brown's work as I am with Michael B. Jordan's, which is why he's my second choice. He also was in Black Panther, where he played Michael B. Jordan's daddy and did really great at it. I've seen a little bit of his work in other things, but I haven't. Nothing he's been in really sticks in my mind because he doesn't tend to gravitate towards the kind of media that I like to watch. So I would love to see him in a big role in a fantasy film like this. I know that every woman in my life loves this guy. So having his energy on screen would help get more butts in seats, help, appeal to that female demographic that, frankly, the first film, or the first set of films, the original set of films, didn't really have as much. This might help close that gap a little bit. So those are my choices for Boromir. Both of those actors could turn in great death scenes because we've already seen them do it in the same movie. So that handles the men of the Fellowship, in other words, the members of the race of man. Let's move on to the person who's not quite human, but reads as human for most of the books and for most of the movies. Gandalf the Grey, the Great Wizard. Now again, Sir Ian McKellen defined this role for a whole generation or two, possibly more, of movie lovers. It would be really hard to beat this guy's performance. But again, we don't need to beat the performances. We just need to match them. So the two actors I picked for Gandalf, I think could do that. They're both older actors, so they are in the right age range. They're both around the same age that Ian McKellen was when he took on the role of Gandalf. So I picked actors who are today in the same ballpark. And like Sir Ian McKellen, they're both actors with a long, respectful pedigree, who are deeply loved and adored both by the general public and by their fellow actors. The first choice is one of my favorite actors of all time, Denzel Washington. Now, the thing about Denzel Washington is a lot of people have an image of him in their mind from his movies in the 90s when he first got popular, and in which he developed a very distinct style, which was basically he's playing Denzel Washington, the actor. And a lot of people who go to see his movies go to see his movies because they want to see Denzel Washington. But he does have the ability to disappear into a role and make you forget that you are watching Denzel Washington. If you doubt me, go watch him in The Tragedy of Macbeth. So he's won multiple Academy Awards, multiple other types of acting awards. I don't think anyone would dispute that he could carry the role of Gandalf without question. He'd bring much different energy to it than Ian McKellen did, but it would be equally good and equally compelling. Now, if we can't get Denzel, we need another actor who's just as good, but maybe not necessarily as well known. So my second choice for Gandalf is Dennis Haysbert. You might know him best from the TV show 24, where he played the first black president. I think before we actually had a black president. So thank him for Obama. I know I did. Anyway, Dennis is amazing. And like Denzel Washington, he's got the range to play comedy, to play drama. He's got gravitas. He's classically trained. He's done Shakespeare, just like Washington has, just like Ian McKellen has. So I think he'd also pull off the role of Gandalf the Grey beautifully, and I would love to see him give it a shot. So let's move on to the dwarf, Gimli. Now, the actor who plays Gimli needs to be somebody who stands apart from the rest of the cast, not just visually, because they did manipulate, they used CGI to manipulate the apparent size of the character in terms of his height. But even without that, John Rhys Davies really just instantly visually stood apart from the rest of the Fellowship, and his voice made him instantly stand apart as well. He had a very distinctive voice, a very distinctive accent, very distinctive eyes, very distinctive way of moving his body that all screamed dwarf. And he was arguably more well-known outside of the United States cinema than he was within United States cinema before The Lord of the Rings. So I picked an actor who's in roughly the same position, who's famous from another cinema industry, but is equally as respected internationally. And my first choice to play Gimli is Shah Rukh Khan. Now, I confess, I cannot remember the name of any movie I've seen Shah Rukh Khan is. I like a lot of Bollywood movies, but I'm terrible at remembering their names. That's on me. But Shah Rukh Khan is a fantastic actor. Go look up anything he's done. If you're not familiar with Bollywood, just type his name into YouTube and you'll find a whole bunch of clips of him. He can sing, he can dance, he can do fight choreo, he can do drama, he can do comedy. And he's got a very distinct voice, and he looks great with a beard, and he's highly respected worldwide as an actor, but still hasn't really broken through in the US. Maybe he doesn't want to, but he's about the right age and the right status as an actor to fulfill the role of Gimli. If we can't get him, my second choice is a little bit sillier, but I hope you'll understand why I picked him. And that actor is Djimon Hounsou. I picked him mostly for his very distinctive accent. John Rhys Davies brought a Scottish brogue to the role of Gimli, and that led to almost everyone in the world defaulting to thinking that dwarves are all Scottish, which is weird because they come from Norse mythology, but we can thank John Rhys Davies and his very distinct accent for that happening. And Djimon Hounsou could do the same thing. His very distinct, I think he's Nigerian, so I'll go with that for now. But his very distinct accent could do the same thing for a more lore accurate and more Tolkien's intent accurate portrayal of Middle-earth being integrated into the real Earth's prehistory at a time before there were any white people. So he is, however, my second choice. I would prefer to see Shah Rukh Khan in this role because I love him. That brings us to the final member of the Fellowship, and the one who is currently my favorite, Legolas. Now, I like Legolas the most. He's grown on me over the years because as I explored different types of weaponry and different types of fighting, I kind of fell in love with archery. It's a hobby I can't really afford at the moment, but all the archery I've done has been with the bows that were provided to me by the training facility. But it's something I really, really want to get into, and Legolas is the iconic archer. So to fulfill his role, we can do a little bit more with skin color, because Tolkien does describe the elves, in many cases, as being fairer than the race of man. So we can conceivably cast an actor to play Legolas who has slightly lighter skin than the actors playing the humans. And we've recently seen an actor who's got great warrior archer energy, graceful archer energy, who has just blown everybody away with his very first performance. And that actor is Dakota Beavers, whom you can currently see in the Predator prequel Prey on Hulu, or if you're outside the United States, on Disney Plus, I think. This guy is great. This was his first acting gig ever, and he did most of his own stunts and most of his own fight choreo. And he looks like Legolas. The first thing I saw when he gets his big fight scene in the film, I said, that's Legolas. That guy should play an elf. And since we're remaking The Lord of the Rings to be more in line with Tolkien's intent of integrating Arda with the true prehistory of the Earth, we need somebody who has, archer energy, and this guy nails it. I've seen interviews with him where he's pretty much said, yeah, I would love to play an elf. So, he wants to be in big budget fantasy and sci-fi action epics. So this is his perfect opportunity. So Dakota, if you're watching this, I hope that you're ready to play Legolas, because I think you were born to play this role. But if we can't get Dakota Beavers, I would settle for Ludi Lin, who I'm including here mostly because of his martial arts background. I don't really know how good of an actor he is, but let's be frank, the role of Legolas doesn't require a whole lot of really great acting. He's just kind of there looking pretty for most of the movies, and then gets some awesome action scenes. We know Ludi Lin can handle action scenes, and he also had a point a couple years ago that there need to be a lot more people who look like him in an adaptation of Tolkien's world. Because, as we've already established, there were no white people in Tolkien's Middle-earth at all. At least if we accept his intent to integrate his stories with the true prehistory of the world. So, Ludi Lin can jump around, he can do flips, he can do martial arts. He seems like a good choice for the role. I'm not as sold on him as I am on Dakota Beavers, but, I'll give him a shot. So that covers the Fellowship. But there are two other characters we can talk about. Characters who made gigantic impressions and who were given somewhat expanded roles in Tolkien's films, and they're both women. And we could use some female energy up in this presentation. So let's start with everyone's favorite elf princess who's also a warrior, Arwen. Now, the Arwen in the movies is different than the Arwen in the books. The movies, Peter Jackson's movies, combined Arwen with the character of Glorfindel. So she had a lot more to do, and one of those things was to kind of be a badass in the first half or so of the Fellowship of the Ring. So we want to get someone to play Arwen who can do all of that, who can convey princess energy and warrior energy, who can be scary, threatening, intimidating, and romantic, and very feminine when the role calls for it. So my first choice to play Arwen is Celia Rose Gooding, whom you can currently see on Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I don't know really anything else that she's done, but I think she's great on that show as Lieutenant Uhura. And the picture I have here is her from an episode. I won't give away any spoilers, but it involves all of the crew members being cast in the roles of fairy tale characters, and she's playing a queen in that story, which is why she's dressed in this awesome getup here. Now, she could do Arwen just as well as Liv Tyler did, because like Liv Tyler, she's sexy as hell. She's very vulnerable when she needs to be, and she can be really tough when she needs to be. She's done all of that on Strange New Worlds, and I think she'd be great as Arwen. However, as I mentioned with Legolas, Tolkien did describe the elves as being somewhat lighter skinned than the race of man. So if we wanted to stick with that theme, I do have another choice who I think would be just as good for the role for all of the same reasons. And that is Journey Smollett Bell. You've probably seen her in The Birds of Prey. I saw her there, and I also saw her in Lovecraft Country. And in both of those roles, she was tough, she was sexy, she was vulnerable, and she was feminine. All at once. Sometimes all at the very same moment. But there were individual scenes where she needed to be one or other of those things, and she handles all of them perfectly. So if we want to stick with the theme of elves being lighter skinned than the race of man, but we also want to stay true to Tolkien's intent of integrating Arda with the true prehistory of Middle-earth, at a time when white people did not exist yet, a light-skinned woman like Journey Smollett Bell is a perfect choice to play Arwen. The other woman on our list is also an elf, the mightiest elf still in Middle-earth, arguably the most important woman in all of Tolkien's legendarium. You know who I'm talking about. My girl Galadriel. Now, Cate Blanchett I fell in love with her when I saw this movie. And again, like all of the other actors in these movies, her performance was iconic. Once again, nothing I'm saying here should be taken as a slight on the performance of anyone in Peter Jackson's films. This is just about maintaining fidelity to Tolkien's authorial intent and honoring the lore. He wanted to integrate his legendarium with the true history of Earth. He chose to set his tales in a time before white people existed. So, as great as Cate Blanchett is, we're going to have to fill these boots with somebody who's equally talented, who can bring that ethereal, yet powerful, yet feminine energy to the role. So my first choice is Lupita Nyong'o, who we also know from Black Panther, or at least who I know from Black Panther and from the movie Us, and a couple of other things. I think she's one of the most beautiful creatures on the planet right now, and she's, like I said, like I described earlier, she's ethereal, she's feminine, she's powerful. She can be all of those things all in the same moment, or she can separate them out as needs be. And I think it would be really awesome to see her say, "Love me and despair." So she'd be my first choice. But again, Galadriel is an elf, and the elves were described as being somewhat lighter skinned than the race of man. So if we wanted to stick with that theme, my other choice is somebody who comes with an international pedigree, just like Shah Rukh Khan does. And that actress is Aishwarya Rai. Again, like Shah Rukh Khan, I've seen her in a ton of stuff. I cannot remember the names of any of the movies. That's on me. I should be better at my Bollywood knowledge. But I think, like Lupita Nyong'o, Aishwarya Rai is one of the most beautiful creatures on Earth. She's very elven for that reason. And for all of the same other reasons, she could step easily into the role of Galadriel. And I would just love to see Aishwarya Rai as an elf. So that wraps up my fan recasting of the Lord of the Rings films in a way that maintains fidelity to Tolkien's intent of integrating his legendarium with the true prehistory of the Earth. But let me know what you think down in the comments. So, that wraps up my fan recasting of The Lord of the Rings and my discussion of forced diversity in Tolkien. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and full disclosure, yes, I am taking the piss here. This entire presentation has been to make fun of and parody all the people who complain about the diverse casting of the TV show Rings of Power. So, if you don't like that, I don't care. I love the show so far. We're only 3 episodes in, but I think it's on a good trajectory, and I don't care that it's not 100% accurate to the words Tolkien wrote, because that's not the point of cinema and TV entertainment. All of the actors on the show look beautiful, they're giving good performances, the production design of the show is pretty terrific, so I'm very happy with it, and I'm getting really, really annoyed at people complaining about woke casting. So this entire video I just made was to take the piss out of them a little bit. Anyway, if you liked what you saw here for any reason at all, give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel. Please share this video. I'd really like to see what happens if it goes viral. I think it would spark an interesting conversation. And until next time, hit the bell for notifications. And until next time, remember that what's best in life is to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and engage in discourse with the women.